I mentioned earlier how you have a lot of room on every single sheet you create in a workbook here in Excel 2019, over 1 million rows and actually over 16,000 columns. Now, you may never fill up a sheet, but you may create and add enough content that you can no longer see it all in one screen. And when you start using the scroll bars to scroll off to the right or scroll down, you may lose your way, not knowing exactly what you're looking at. That's because labels down the left-hand side may disappear, labels across the top may disappear. There is a tool to help you with that. It's called freezing panes, and that's what we're going to explore with our leaf and mortar workbook here, LM Revenues 0205, if you're catching up. The first thing we're going to do is zoom in. This is also a helpful feature when you're zoomed into content. Down the bottom right-hand corner, we see the zoom slider. Let's click the plus sign a few times, and you can see when we get up to around 150, 160%, it's easier to read the content, but all of a sudden, we no longer see the labels down the left, so we're not sure what the data is that we're looking at unless we use the scroll bar to go back, and sure enough, there's the locations. And then we move off to the right, and again, we lose those labels. If we scroll down as well, now we're just looking at numbers. We have no idea what they relate to. So here's where we can start freezing panes. And there's a few different options. Let's scroll all the way to the top and all the way to the left. When we go up to the View tab here and click it, the View ribbon contains some options for, there it is, freezing panes. This is a drop-down, and this gives us 3 different options. Go ahead and give it a click. Let's skip the first one to see that we can freeze the top row. That means we'll always be able to see the top row no matter how far down we scroll. Well, in our worksheet here, you can see that's just the title, Leaf and Mortar Projected Revenues. We could also freeze the first column, meaning no matter how far to the right we scroll, we'll always be able to see the contents of column A, and that would work in our scenario. But we want both. So in that case, we're looking at something called freeze panes. If we go to freeze first column and click there, you're going to see a faint line in between columns A and B. And that means now as we scroll off to the right, we see the data, and notice how column A stays put. We can always see what we're looking at here and line it up with the appropriate location. But if we scroll down, we lose sight of the months of the year and the quarters. So we actually need to use 2 options at once, and that's where freeze panes comes in handy. Click it again up here on the ribbon, and this time choose unfreeze panes to deselect what we chose a moment ago, and that is to freeze the first column. And instead, we want to freeze column A, but we also want the first 4 rows. So you can see rows 1, 2, 3, and 4 take us down to cells that contain labels for January through December and our quarters. So all you need to do is click below and to the right of what you always want to see. I always want to see the contents of column A. That means I'm moving over to column B. I always want to see the top 4 rows, so that means clicking in row 5. That's cell B5. That's where I want to freeze things, above and to the left. Now when we go back to freeze panes and click that drop down and choose freeze panes at the top, we'll be freezing the top 4 rows and our first column because of where we clicked before we went here. Go ahead. Now you can see the faint line between columns A and B, but also between rows 4 and 5, which means if we scroll down, we always see January, February, March, etc. And as we go to the right, we always see the locations.